Good morning.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. Good morning. Okay. With the help of Hashem, we are learning ERUVIN Daf Ayin Beis. We left off yesterday by the Mishnah, more or less the middle of the Amid. Before we go on, I want to speak about a few nekudas that are negeya to the last sugya that we learned, which is a fundamental sugya, the brisa that we had on Daf Ayin Aleph Amid Beis, the machloikas between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. First of all, we spoke out correctly so that when we're speaking about whether Eruv works for Shituf, whether Shituf works for Eruv, the case was not that there was a few Chatzeros that made an Eruv with itself, but the case is that there were Chatzeros that were one near the other, and they had an opening that opened up one to the other, which means that they had the option either to leave their Chatzer into the Mavui. They also could have left their Chatzer into the neighboring Chatzer. So there is where there's a Havamina that if the Eruvei Chatzeros, if the Chatzeros made an Eruv one with the adjacent Chatzer, so they are all Mu'urev, so maybe that should be in the place of a Shituf. That was correctly as we spoke out. When the question was whether a Shituf Muva'os can also be in the place of an Eruv Chatzeros, that's a much broader question. That's a question even if you don't have Chatzeros that are opening up one into the other. But by the fact that a Shituf Muva'os is coming from all of the members of all of the Chatzeros, if you were to subscribe to the Shita that a Shituf Muva'os works in the place of an Eruv Chatzeros, then b'diavad, if you made a Shituf, you b'chlal don't have to make an Eruv Chatzeros at all. Now, when the Gemara concluded that the three versions, whether halachic and avmeir, which means that one doesn't cover for the other, or whether minik and avmeir, and finally the last version, Rabbi Yechanan's version, no hagu ha'am ken avmeir, we keep on having this, right? We had this a few daf ago, and here again, Rashi reminds us that no hagu ha'am ken avmeir means that really we don't paskin like Rav Meir. But if a person after the fact did like Rav Meir and he comes to ask whether he did correctly or not, we tell him, okay. And what does that mean? The question is, what does that mean? Rav Meir is the machmir here. Rav Meir, for example, is saying in the last case that we just gave, that if a chevra made a shituf muva'os, they still have to make an eruvei chatzeros. So if a person did both steps, why would he come ask? What's the downside of being machmir? When you're lenient, you only made a shituf, you b'chlal didn't make an eruv, then you can ask a Rav later, oy geval, did I do correctly or not? So very importantly, the Tosfos, which is under Rashi, right now, hagu ha'am ken Rav Meir, Tosfos asks that question, and he gives a few approaches. The first approach is gavaldik. He says the only downside, if one were to follow the shita of Rabbi Meir, to be machmir, never allow an eruv to be also the shituf, or a shituf would be an eruv, is that for each one you make a bracha. If we would follow the Chachamim, like for example, that if a shituf was made, it already covers the need of making an eruv chatzeros, then if you would then make an eruv chatzeros, you would not make a bracha, it would be a bracha levatala. Only when you're a machmer like Rav Meir, that a shituf never covers the need of also making an eruv, so this person went ahead and they made a shituf, with a bracha. Then they made the Eruv Chatzeres with a bracha. And then they asked, Oy Gewalt, did I make a bracha levatola? So that is where Rabbi Yechanan says, after the fact, okay, you had on whom to lean on, and don't be concerned about your bracha levatola. Okay, that's if Gavaldik, one follow-up just to yesterday before we go on. Another very important follow-up. Now you'll also appreciate, okay, we live here in Los Angeles, assuming if we follow the shittas that a city representative has enough rights to do the schidus makim with him for all of the people that live in the city. Assuming that's correct, which is what people do over here in LA, the LA Eruv from the RCC, no one makes a shituf mavais, no one makes Eruv Chatzeres according to that shita. How do they do that? They do that because they make a shituf, and indeed they don't paskin like Rav Meir. Nohagu ha'am ki Rav Meir, but they are following the shita of the Chachamim that a shituf will include an Eruv, which is why there are some who opine that an Eruv Chatzeres could be made by making just a shituf. And if you hold that a shituf can be made, then indeed, many people here, they carry, aside of the physical enclosement of the Eruv with the Surah Pesach, they have those shittus upon whom to rely on. Now, if we don't follow that opinion, if we hold that if you make a shituf, you still have to make an Eruv Chatzeres. So even if one will say that, yeah, you can make a shituf with the city official, but an Eruv Chatzeres has to be made. And coming back over here, our approach by Hasidim, and especially by Lubavitch, is that not only are we obligated, each one here in Los Angeles, to make an Eruv, not because we don't rely on the Eruv Alei. The Eruv Alei only deals with the enclosement. But not only that, we make it with a bracha. Now you appreciate the bracha part. Okay. Now we're going to start learning two Mishnayos today, Mishnah Amud Aleph and the Mishnah Amud Beis. They both share a common theme. And that is that when you have a chatzir, who has to participate with the Eruv Chatzeres, each one giving their own bread? Every Baal Habayis, every householder. Well, it's very simple. If there's, let's say, 5 houses, single family houses, opening up into the same chatzir. What happens if in one house, we'll call this house a mansion, a traklan, because it's large, many different groups live in the same house? Now, if the house have what we would call different bedrooms, the way we have bedrooms in our homes, one room being separated by a proper wall, then there's no doubt that every room is considered a separate group, and they all have to participate separately on their own in the Eruv Chatzeres. The first Mishnah will be what happens if you have such a large mansion and you have groups, but the physical divider between one group and the other isn't the proper wall that creates different bedrooms. Now, it's not that clear in the Mishnah how inferior were those separations, where we will actually have 4 approaches in the Gemara how to explain the Mishnah. Don't get nervous. It's a very easy Gemara today. But there was a very short divider, there was a curtain-like divider, there was a curtain-like divider that went until the roof or not until the roof. But if the dividers in between these environments are flimsy, so then there's a question whether we divide each of these chaburas, and perhaps only one participation of bread from all of the mansion will suffice. Truth be told, the same question is in this house itself, right? There is the common area of the house, and then there's each one's cubicle. Do the members of each cubicle have to make an Eruv Chatzeres to be able to carry in their common area? Or do we say, since they're not properly divided physically, the house itself is already out of them? That will be the first theme of today. And on the Ayin Beis Amud Beis, we're going to have the other Mishnah that's speaking about the same concept, but not because people were not properly divided. No, they will speak about a chatzir, that the father had a house, and Baruch Hashem, the father did well, and the father and the mother were generous, and every child had a home in the same chatzir. And they were soymech hashulchan avim. The father was supporting them, which means they were eating from the father's pocket. Now, are they considered one entity, or are they considered separate entities? Same, in other words, it's not about physical dividers, but when would we say that since people are anyway so connected, either it's a father and son relationship, we're going to have, God willing, on Daf Ayin Gimel, the same thing with a master and a slave, the same thing with a Rav and a Talmud, when there is a relationship compounded with the one supporting the other, would we say they're so one that they don't have to give each one a separate eruv or not. They live in separate houses, and therefore they're considered separate entities. This will lead us into a sugya that maybe we'll start today, maybe we'll start this in the next year, which is already much broader than just eruvei chatzeros, but let's begin with eruvei chatzeros. What happens if let's go back to the case of the father and the sons. Let's say they all eat together. They all eat in the house of the mother, in the house of the father, but they sleep in their own homes. So do we say here are the words that makom lina is the determining factor? Since they sleep in different environments, they are different entities. Therefore, each one has to give their own a part of the eruv. Or do we say it's called makom pita? Makom pita means since they all eat together, they actually physically, if that were to be the case, they're considered one entity, even if they sleep in different environments. Now you can just appreciate how this is such a gavaldic topic. Let's go to Yeshiva Bachim by eruvei chatzeros. Right, every group has their own room, but they all eat in the dining room. And really, how the sugi is broader than just eruvin. What about the lighting the Chanukah menorah? What about lighting Shabbos candles? Where do you light the Shabbos candles? Is it in the place where you eat? Isn't the place where it's all linked? But Chavir, let us start on the Ayin Beis by the Mishnah, more or less in the middle of the Amid Chamisha. Baruch HaTorah. You know it says the Mishnah Chamisha. Chaburais, there were 5 groups. Look at the word shafsu, the very important word, bitrak lenechlad, that they are shafsu, as many point out, is a temporary lashon. In other words, if there would be people that would permanently live in this traklan, in this mansion, even if each environment is not properly sectioned off with a real wall, but if this is the way they live, then for sure each one is considered a separate bias. And therefore, both concerning, do they have to make an eruv chatzeros to be allowed to carry in this house on the common area? And if this traklan is in a larger chutzner, other batim go into that chutzner, they also, each one has to be a participant in that eruv chatzeros, no doubt about it. On the other side, this is also important, if you don't even consider their dwelling there a shafsu, if it's so temporary, halachically means they're not even there for 30 days, then for sure they're not considered separate entities. Here it's like in between. They're there for 30 days, but they themselves don't consider it their dira. It is temporary. Why is it temporary? Because physically, even when people are not that wealthy, it's very difficult to have different groups living in the same room when the divider is not a real wall. And parenthetically, that's the whole issue, whether you have to make an eruv tchumen in a hotel. It's negate to all this. We'll speak about that maybe later, maybe in next year. Okay, but coming back to the case of the I can't hear you, Danny.
You said eruv tchumen. You mean eruv chatzeros, right?
Let me eruv chatzeros. Let me sound corrected. Eruv chatzeros. Just the hamaskan of this sugi is a big machlokes in Periscope. We paskin that if you go to a hotel, you don't have to make an eruv chatzeros, but it has nothing to do with our sugya. It has to do with the fact is that you have no rights in your room at all, because the management can say that you have to go from this room to that room because they have to do maintenance or for whatever reason. And because of that, everyone is who's the balabas, the hotel owner. You don't even have, when you rent a house here, it's your house. The landlord cannot get rid of you so quick. It's a lot easier to move you around when you have a hotel. And that's our approach, but that's a very big topic. Coming back over here, there's some sort of temporary, but not too temporary. It's 30 days or more dwelling of 5 groups. Says Beis Shammai Oimnim, Eruv L'chol Chabura V'Chabura. Very important. And Eruv L'chol Chabura V'Chabura, guys, means 2 dinim. Remember, 2 dinim. Aleph, in the traklan itself, if they don't make an eruvei chatzeros, they may not carry from their cubicle into the common area. Then number 2, this traklan opens up into a chatzer. So do other batim. So this chatzer is going to make a collective eruv chatzeros. Each household member, each group, each cubicle has to be a participant in the eruv chatzeros. Okay. That's the Rashi. Look, quick, let's read the Rashi. Beis Shammai Yoimrim, Rishu Yiseyen Chalukin, Betzarech L'chol Chabura Litein Pas Be'eruv HaChatzer. First, the larger Chatzer, because it's considered as if 5 homes open up to it. right? I got the order wrong. Rashi gives the second din, and now that's the first din. And V'hu Adin says Rashi, the imbo lo haitzi mirishuzu lizu. Forget about going out into the chutzner. In the traklin itself, each one you have to make an eruv. However, Beis Hillel oimrim, that now again the Mishnah does not clarify exactly what type of divider divided the cubicles. Again, we'll have in the Gemara 4 ways of learning the mitzias of the Mishnah. But in the case of the Mishnah, says Beis Hillel, no. That eruv echad lekulam. Let's read inside the Rashi again. Beis Hillel oimrim ein mechitza zu chiluk reshus, because it's the mechitza. Look inside the Rashi's words. Shefeilahi. We're not speaking about a real wall like you have in your home, one bedroom to another bedroom. And therefore, Eruv Echad Lekulan, Beis Hillel argues with both dinim. Number one, if there are other houses in this chutzner, this traklin has to only give one bread to be a participant. And number two, says Rashi, Ubetoich hatraklin nami moitziin mizul lezu b'lo yeruv. Shahatraklin mechabron. Because the home itself merges them, and v'kiven the b'neim ein sarich eruv nasa echad mehem shliach l'kulam. And now Rashi says something of big klal, that these two dinim are connected one to the other. And now Rashi is, since they don't have to make an eruv between themselves, nothing. Now, when this traklin wants to participate with other homes, Rashi doesn't say they're one family. They're not one family. The home is like an eruv. Ki'ilu Rashi is saying they need to make an eruv, but you don't have to do it with bread. The home itself and the lack of real mechitzas makes the eruv. So now it's as if they have an eruv with themselves, and now there's another klal, which is what we're going to learn a lot in these sugyas. Let's speak about one chutzner to an adjacent chutzner. Who has to make the eruv? Once chutzner aleph made an eruv with itself, and chutzner beis made the eruv with itself, when you are ma'at of chutzner aleph and beis, does every member of chutzner aleph have to participate in that eruv? We don't say that. We say any member of chutzner aleph can represent everyone. How? Because he's already mu'uref with his own chutzner. He's like one partner representing the corporation. So same thing over here. The house itself is ma'at of everyone in this traklin. And now, one of them, Rashi says, becomes like a shliach for all of them. In a normal case, we have 5 houses in a chutzner, and they make an eruv. The eruv b'neim. Now they become like one. And therefore, Rashi says, only eruv echad lekulan. Okay.
Rabbi, at this point, do we understand that Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel really agree conceptually, whether if it's one, then only one is sufficient, and if they're separate, then everyone needs to make their own. And it's just a question of, are we looking at this situation in the mansion as being one or being separate?
Correct. Another important nakuda. It's not like Beis Hillel is considering them like a family. He's not. He's saying that they need an eruv, but the house itself is ma'at of them. I'll give you a great story, the story of the Rebbe's father. When the Rebbe's father, who got smicha from Rab Chaim of Brisk, when he got to Brisk, so he walked in there, he walked into the Beis Din where there were people, it was during Sukkot, and there were people that built a sukkah in a common area, and they forgot to make an eruv chatzeres. And they asked Rab Chaim, what should they do? If I'm not mistaken, it was already on Yom Tov. Now we know the sugyas of Bittul Rishus. So Rab Chaim asked Rab Leivik, you answer. So Rab Leivik says they don't have to make an eruv with pas, because by the fact that they built a sukkah together, the sukkah is ma'at of them. This is something that's not written anywhere, and that was a great intro. Rab Chaim was very impressed with that. But here we're saying, I'm not saying it's not the same, but it's not pshat that they don't need an eruv. Rashi says, Beis Hillel holds that the traklin itself is ma'at of them. So now they are already a corporation. They are incorporated. And therefore, one can represent all. Back in the Mishnah, meaning Beis Hillel was moided to Beis Shammai, that if every group is living in a proper room, separated with walls, or common people are different story homes, one chabura in one story, one chabura on another story. That physical divider considers them completely separated, and therefore shehem tzrichim eruv l'chol chabura v'chabura, both dinim of Beis Shammai. The Mishnah is only dafka because it was a large room that did not have a real mechitza. Like Rashi uses the words, it was a mechitza shefela. We'll see what that means, and that's why we have the machlekes. So here in the Gemara, Namad Aleph, we're going to have no less than 4 different ways of understanding the Metzias of the Mishnah. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Nachman, version number 1 of Rav Nachman. The machlekes in the Mishnah is only the mesipas. Mesipas means a makeshift divider that's not even 10 tvachim tall. That changes the whole image. It's mamish, not even 10 tvachim tall. So they're sleeping in the same place, they're eating in the same place. It's basically they have a little divider. The kids from my family cannot easily run into your area. Even if it's only told 10 tfachim or more, that's called a divider. And that's version number 1. Version number 2, that Amar Rav Nachman, af b'mesipas machloikes, af, which means Beis Hillel, who is lenient, let's call this lenient, will allow for a divider even 10 tvachim or taller, still not to be considered a real divider because it doesn't go until the roof. Beis Shammai, who is the machmed, who considers every group separate, he's machmed even if the divider is under 10. That's version number 2. Now we're going to learn opinion 3 and 4. Now 3 and 4, who said which one? Machlekes b'mechitzos hamagias letikra. There are mechitzas that the case in the Mishnah is that the mechitzas are going until the roof. Now hold on. If mechitzas are going until the roof, my friends, how is this not called chadarim? Chadarim. So Tosfos explains, a cheder means you have a wall, like in your home, like in my home. Thank God, we have homes. That you have a wall that goes until the roof. Here we're speaking about a mechitza, but it's a weak mechitza. For example, curtains. You have a curtain, the curtain rod is on the roof, but that's not called a proper wall. That is where you have the machlekes, meaning, even though it's way bigger than 10 tfachim, divrei hakol eruv echad lekulam, even Beis Shammai. And opinion number 4, Chad Amar, but mechitzos, machlekes is only the mechitzos she'ein magias letikra. Guys, this is not the second version of Rav Nachman, because the second version of Rav Nachman said that they also argue when it's 10 tfachim or more, but it doesn't go until the roof. But also b'mesipas. That means according to the second version in Rav Nachman, Beis Shammai holds that even if the mechitza is under 10 tfachim, it's considered separated. This fourth version doesn't hold that way. This fourth version holds that if the mechitzas are not even 10 tfachim, everyone considers them together. They only argue by mechitzas, taka not until the roof, but it's above 10 tfachim or higher. The mechitzas shemegias letikram, abo mechitzas shemegias letikram, divrei hakoil, even though they are a curtain like they're flimsy, they open and close easily. Divrei hakoil tzricham eruv l'chol chabura v'chabura. So these are the 4 options in the Mishnah, daf ayin beis amud beis, and the Gemara very easily will right away rule out 3. Don't get nervous, Chabra. It's not that complicated. There's one braysa that clarifies. And here you see the evolution of the Torah Shabbat, evolution meaning that in the times of the Gemara, not everyone knew the braisas. They didn't know it. So it could have been that when Rabbeinu HaKadosh poured out a Mishnah, for many generations, they were debating what's the meaning of the Mishnah. And then they hear a braysa and it clarifies it. It's top of the Amid. Meisvei, we'll see. It's for sure, it's going to end up being a refutation on 3 of the 4 opinions. It says in a brayso, Amar Rebbe Yehuda Hasabar Anayatana. Hasabar means the thinker. So Tana Rebbe Yehuda says with Hasabar, he was called that way. Says Rashi al Shem Churfei. He was very sharp. That loy nechluku clearly loy nechluku Beis Shammai u'Beis Hillel al mechitzos hamagias letikra. Let's already rule out the 3rd opinion we had. If the mechitzos go until the roof, even though they're not walls, they're curtain or some other type of flimsier divider that can be put up and taken down. Everyone agrees if it's until the roof, everyone. Because this completely separates one environment from the other. Now, mind you, the Braisa didn't say that they also argue the way the second version of Rav Nachman was, even under 10. Only a mechitzas, she'ein magias latikra means it's higher than 10. Elamat's not touching the roof. This is considered a mechitza, and therefore, eiduv l'chol chabura v'chabura. Classical, this is so classic. You talk about Beshama is gevura. Gevura means to divide, to be mabdal, to separate. So he sees at things as separators. Basila says no. Open in the top. Eiduv v'chalukula. End of quote. And now let's go one by one. Says the Gemara. Right, that for sure. Tiyufta means they said that because they didn't yet have this brisa. This brisa refutes that opinion. We're not going to make a machloikes. The Mishnah didn't say anything otherwise. The Mishnah left it vague. So the brisa, as usual, gives more words, elaborates more, and it clarifies what the machloikes is. Next, this brisa is a siyato. The third opinion we had on Amud Aleph. Let's go weiter. Now we have two versions in Rav Nachman. Let's go now to the first. Listen to Amar Rav Nachman, version number 1, that the machlokes is only b'mesipas, and for sure to yufta, because this brisa doesn't mention a word of mesipas. This brisa is contrasting up until the roof or not up until the roof. Not zikr, not mesipas. Mesipas is a whole different category. Not only is it not up until the roof, guys, imagine a divider that's not even 10 tvachim tall. That's something that the Braisa needed to speak about. However, here is the kasha. So now we refuted 3. Perhaps we'll refute the 4th. I'm sorry. We allowed the third version. But let's see whether this refutes the other 3. So the last one it refutes. The first version of Rav Nachman it refutes. Question is, that after Mesipas Machloikes, Lema also to have it to Yufta, because the Braisa does not mention Mesipas. Because the Braisa doesn't mention Mesipas, so the Gemara will say that Rav Nachman can still hold his second version. Amar Loch Rav Nachman, I will tell you that Pliga b'mechitza, which is what the Braisa mentions. But maybe, not maybe, I hold Huadim that they also argue b'mesipas. Now, if Beis Hillel holds that a mechitza that's, as long as it doesn't touch the roof, is not a mechitza, then Beis Hillel doesn't have to speak about mesipas. It's included. Of course, with Beis Hillel, a mesipas is not a divider. But Beis Shammai should have been articulate. If Beis Shammai holds not only a mechitza that doesn't hit the roof is a mechitza, but even if it's only a mesipas, it's also a mechitza. Why was that mentioned? So Rav Nachman will tell you. Only the mechitza, the Braisa only mentions mechitza. And now the classical lifligi b'mesipas l'diyacha koichem the Beis Shammai, which is like a big chiddush, and the answer is koich deteda adif. So let me just clarify. So the Braisa that we have in Amud Beis doesn't refute 3 of the 4. It refutes 2 of the 4. It's Zicher using the same lashon of the 3rd we had on Amud Aleph, and Rav Nachman's second version could still stand. You can have a kasha on it, but it can be explained. All right. And not only that, let me show you how much Rav Nachman was confident that it doesn't refute him. That Amar Rav Nachman, Amar Rav, halachik Rabbi Yehuda hasabar. Which means he's not quoting Rabbi Yehuda hasabar. He understands that his second version of this refuted the first version of Rav Nachman. Yeah, Danny.
This mesipas, what exactly is it? Meaning, right now we have a category of curtains, right?
Okay, very good. So let's go like this. There is another detailed machloikes rishonim as to, are we also speaking about the material of this mechitza? Rashi, when he says mesipas is made out of kanim, is implying that the issue with mesipas, aside of it not being 10 tvachim tall, it's made out of a very weak material. You know, the types of mats we put on our sukkahs lamashul, that's a shemata, it's nothing. Other rishonim don't care what material the mesipas was made out of. It's only about the height that we see in the Gemara. B'chlal in halach, we have different heights. So mesipos means a partition that's less than 10 tefachim. Rashi teaches mesipos means a makeshift. A makeshift means it's even weaker than a curtain, at least hangs. It's hanging, it's not going to get knocked down that easy. When you have something on the ground that's made out of kanim, that's not even 10 tefachim tall, it's the flimsiest of mechitzas. Anyway, that's a big discussion. Let's go right. Says the Gemara, not only does Rav Nachman not consider himself refuted, he's quoting Rav that Allah is like this Tanach, Amar Rav Nachman by Yitzchak, Masnis and Namadaika, which is Tiktani umoidim bisman shemiktsas and shuroim b'chadarim, or in different aliyahs, shehem srichen erev l'chol chabura v'chabura. Now we touch the Mishnah kepshutai, but the Rav Nachman will have an issue with it. So ask the Gemara, my chadarim, my aliyahs. So what exactly does the Mishnah mean? Ilema chadarim mamish, v'aliyahs aliyahs mamish. You know what? If people, different families, are living in a large mansion and everyone has their own physical bedroom, then the Mishnah would not even need to mention a pshita. Ella, the contrast in the Mishnah, Ella lav ke'ein chadarim, ke'ein aliyahs, umaninu mechitzes amagias letikra shmamino. In other words, this detail that Rav Nachman is holding, that Beis Shammai argues af b'mesipas, that he doesn't have the diuk. That's not his diuk from the Mishnah. The diuk from the Mishnah is that the latter part of the Mishnah, that everyone is moida, that if it's chadarim, that every group is considered halachically a separate group. You know what that is referring to? Not only a proper bedroom, of course, but even if you have curtains separating environments one from the other, that is also the case of the latter part of the Mishnah, which means that the Reish of the Mishnah is speaking about mechitzas, or speaking about that you have mechitzas, it's bigger than mesipas, since it doesn't go until the ceiling. That's why Beis Hillel holds it's not considered a second environment. I was thinking in hospitals you have very common these mechitzas. They go until the ceiling. You have a lot of beds, and then they put that curtain. That's mamish the mechitzas hamagiyos l'tikra. But again, the guys, don't forget that we began the Mishnah by speaking many of the achronim that hold that if people don't live there for 30 days, you can't even say the word sheshafsu. So this is the approach of many poskim. In other words, even if you have a mechitzas, a curtain that amagias letikra, it's still flimsy. The reason why lekula alma is considered separated, that's only if people live there for 30 days that way, and they left the curtain up for 30 days. That is more kaveya it. Okay.
So if they're there for less than 30 days, then the lekula alma, they have to make the eruv.
Then they're not considered separated. It goes into the whole hotel sheet. In other words, when people live in an environment for a very small amount of time, they're not considered balabatim enough for you to demand of them to make an eruv chatzeros or to participate in a larger eruv chatzeros. Okay, guys, let's go on.
So they would just be able to carry in the house regardless, or out.
Exactly, from their cubicle into the common area. Okay, now. At Khan, the way all of these Amoraim were understanding the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Now we're going to have a Tana. It's a mamash amazing. Again, they discovered a Braisa. And from this Braisa, we will understand, we'll extrapolate that this Tana of the Braisa had a complete different understanding of Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Let's go slowly. We have time. So we're going to read Pashut, the Gemara, the Braisa, and Rashi. Just to know, Rashi that we're going to read is going to be 11 lines from the top of the Amid. But let's go into the Gemara. Tani we learned in the Braisa. This Bamed Dvarim Amurim is words in a Braisa after it quotes the Reisha of our Mishnah. So the Braisa quotes the Machlokes Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, and then it goes weiter. Bamed Dvarim Amurim kishomay lichem es eruvim l'makom acher. That's if we're speaking about the members that live in this Traklin who are joining, like we mentioned, step number 1 in Rashi, is that they are joining in a larger Eruvei Chatzeres because this Traklin opens up into a Chatzer. Other houses opened up into the same Chatzer. So an Eruvei Chatzeres, Eruvei Chatzeres has to be made. Where are you placing it? Guys, remember one klal. We had this on Daf Memtes, and this is a klal for this whole sugya. The house in which the Eruvei Chatzeres is placed doesn't have to participate with any bread. So if you have 5 homes, the emes is how many homes are going to give bread for the Eruv Chatzeres? 4. Now, all of our Mishnahs only when the Taraklin, as well as other homes, are placing the Eruv in another home, not in the Taraklin. But if, again, everyone in this larger Chatzar is making a Eruv Chatzeres, but it's being placed in this mansion, Divrei Hakoil Eruv Echad Lekulan, including Beis Shammai, Upa. Let's read inside Rashi. Masul Kidvash, Mamish. Guys, Rashi, 11 lines on the top of the Amid. And that statement sheds a whole new understanding in Beis Shammai. Why would that make a difference? Why would that make a difference? So says Rashi, v'hai Tana, mi the kamaflig be mokim acher lebo etzlon, is a raya that they have a whole different understanding of Beis Shammai. Sfira le tamayu de Beis Shammai u Beis Hillel, lav b'mechitzois pligi, elo afilu le Beis Shammai nami teraklon mechabron ve'ein sorech eruv b'neihem. Like we learned Rashi in the Mishnah, guys, it's not that Beis Hillel and the Mishnah held that they're b'chlal not considered separated. We didn't say that. Rashi beautifully said in the Mishnah, Beis Hillel says you're different groups, and there is some sort of mechitza. But since they are under the same roof of the Traklin and they're not properly divided, the house is in lieu of the Eruv Chatzeres for the house. Says Rashi in this Braisa holds, Beis Shammai is also moida to that. I'm emphasizing that that's important. It's not that they don't need an Eruv. They need an Eruv, but the house is their Eruv. And therefore, what do we view them as? Let's by continuing Rashi. It's as if they're 2 adjacent chatzeros, chatzer 1, chatzer 2. In every chatzer, you have 5 people, 5 homes. There's a door in between them. So normally you need to do 2 steps. First, every chatzer has to be ma'arav, which is what the traklin itself does. It's as if they live in their own chatzer, and the house itself is in the place of, it's just like it is an Eruv Chatzeres, and now they want to go into another Chatzer, which is what's happening, because this Taraklin opens up into a Chatzer, so it's like an adjacent Chatzer. Now, we mentioned this on Amud Aleph. What did we mention on Amud Aleph? How many people have to make an Eruv between Chatzer Aleph and Chatzer Beis? So what we mentioned is not Beis Shammai. We gave it as, we mentioned this many times already. You don't need every member of Chatzer Aleph again to give bread. No. Any one of Chatzer Aleph who's already representing everyone else, only he has to take bread to Chatzer Beis. Beis Shammai disagrees with that. That's this machlokas. Let's read it inside. The Sfira Lahu Beis Shammai holds that the Chamisha she'erevu as Chatzerim. Chatzer Aleph, and now uboyim la'arevim Chatzer Acheres. Now they want to join to be able to carry from their Chatzer into their neighboring Chatzer with whom there is a halachic opening. Im ma'ilichim sham es eruvam ein echad mehem shliach lekulam. Beis Shammai doesn't subscribe to that. Ela kulan tzrichem litein pas. That's the meaning of Beis Shammai in our Mishnah. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel both hold that as long as you don't have proper mechitzos, walls separating each chabura, the traklin itself is ma'arev every member of this mansion. The only question is if they want to join the larger chatzir. So Beis Shammai holds, based on his shita, that when Chatzer Aleph joins Chatzer Beis, every member in Chatzer Aleph has to participate. So over here, however, that's why Beis Shammai says, we're continuing in Rashi, that v'im eruv ba b'bayis echad mehen, then kulam shav sham, right? In the home that you bring the eruv, that home doesn't have to participate. So even Beis Shammai holds that if the eruv is being brought into this traklin, no one has to give any bread. Not you need bread to carry in this traklin because the traklin is out of them, and the fact that how are they members on the other chatzin because bread was brought in the traklin, and every chabura can say it was brought by me. we say they are separated, but now that the traklin was ma'at of them, each one can claim the eruv is by me, and therefore I don't have to participate. The traklin nami kivin the reshus achasi lahani damoy. It's as if again an eruv is needed, but the traklin is the eruv because the ilah beishamay the shoyis chaluk is saying the hein loy irvu ki irvu baletza may hava. That's Rashi's raya that from the Braisa you can extrapolate as vos that Beishamai agrees with Beis Hillel. The whole machloikas was a new machloikas. If one chatzir is ma'arif with another chatzir, can one be a shliach, which is what Beis Hillel holds, according to what we're saying? Or Beishamai here in the Mishnah is saying, no, the traklin is ma'arif them, but now everyone has to send bread if the eruv chatzeris and the chatzir is being put labayis acher. Very good. That's the first understanding of this Braisa. Now, based on this, guys, you can keep your finger more or less on Ashi, but let's go back into the Gemara. Now that we have this into Amachlikas B'Shamai Beis Hillel, so now Keman Oslo Hadatanya that Chamisha Shugava Weseruvim. If Chatzar Aleph made a normal eruv Chatzeris, and now they have a door going into Chatzar Beis. They want to connect. They want to merge with Chatzar Beis. We have such a Braisa without attributing it to any opinion. Now we know that only follows Beis Hillel, which is fine. Come on, Beis Hillel. Now we're going to learn the final. Look at our Mishnah. First, we had a four-way machlekes how to understand the Mishnah. Now we're really having a Braisa that Bechlal has a whole different understanding in the Machloikas Beishamai and Beis Hillel, and now we're having another version of this Braisa. Oy Gewalt. The Ika da Amri, that the Braisa that we just quoted says something different, and that is Bamed Varam Amurim. This goes on Shitas Beis Hillel. We're going to read Rashi in a moment. What does Beis Hillel say that they are one entity? That's only Kishoya Eruv Ba'etzlon. They're only one entity. If the eruv from the other homes in the larger chatzir is being brought in the traklin, here is where Beis Hillel says what we just said before, L'kula Alma, since the traklin is ma'at of them, and the home in which you place the eruv chatzeres doesn't have to participate with bread, so every cubicle can claim it's with me. It's in my general home. But if they want to participate, which they want to, but it's being done not by the bread being placed in the traklin, but if it's being placed in any other home, divrei hakol, even Beis Hillel holds tzrichem erev l'chol chabura v'chabura. Oy gewalt. Look inside the Rashi. V'ika da amri b'ho pligi. B'Beishamai sabri af al pi shereshus achasi v'dami l'chamisha she'ervu v'ervu ba'etzlan. Which means that even though, according to this Braisa, still there's one leniency. Beishamai holds that to carry in this traklin, to carry from a cubicle into the common area, even according to this latter version, you don't need to make an eruv chatzeres. Everyone subscribes that the traklin itself is ma'at of them. Still, Beishamai will hold afilo hachizak Rashi that kula boy le'eruve. When they're joining the other members of the chatzir, everyone has to give bread. Everyone has to give bread, even if the bread is being put in their traklin. Now, 1 second. If the bread is being put in one cubicle, that cubicle doesn't have to give. But other than that, everyone has to give. Beis Hillel is lenient only over here that if the eruv is coming to this traklin, no matter where it's placed in the traklin, no one has to give it. But even Beis Hillel will be minded that if the eruv is being placed in any other home in the chatzir, since at the end of the day they didn't actually make an eruv, or let's go better, let's go that Beis Hillel holds that when chatzir aleph is participating with chatzir beis, every member of chatzir aleph has to participate. According to this latter version, no one subscribes to the way we paskin that one shliach of one group can represent the whole group. No, and therefore everyone will be minded that everyone has to give their own eruv. And now, divrei hakol tzrichem eruv l'chol chabura v'chabura. So Eibazoi says the Gemara, "Kaman Oslo Hadatanya Chamisha Shagavu Es Eruvim." Never Chatzar Aleph made an eruv. Everyone gave an eruv, but now when they want to merge with Chatzar Beis, adjoining them, adjacent to them, according to our understanding, Kaman Kolek Echad. But what do we have over here? We have something huge that according to both versions of this Baraisa, of this Tana, not the way we learned in the Mishnah, we read Rashi, that Machlekes Bisham and Bisilul is in two dinim, not in one din, which is, forget about other houses in this Chatzim. When you have people living in such a home and they have cubicles dividing them, however way you'll understand the pshat of the cubicle, all right? Everyone will be minded that in this home, you don't have to make an Eruv Chatzeres. Why? Because the Traklan is ma'at of them. And the only machlokes is when they are participating with others. And in that itself, we have the two versions. Okay, we have time. Now we're moving on to the second Mishnah. Like we explained, the concept of this Mishnah is like the first Mishnah. What's the concept? We're analyzing how do we divide or combine different balabatim of a chutzim. So normally, right, if, 1 second guys, what happens if many people live in the same house and the different family members, there's no walls at all. We have clarity. Two different families. For sure, only one Eruv is needed, one pass, because there's no mechitzas, they're under one roof, they're one. In other words, there are times that a certain type of relationship combines two groups to the point that they are considered as one. You will appreciate the underlying ruchnius of the sugya. How one is a father and a son. How one is a chassid and a rebbe. This is mamish, the words of the Gemara. So here like this, first of all, there's already a relationship, but that relationship in itself, the Mishnah begins with father and son. We'll leave everything else to Daf Ayin Gimel. But that in itself is not enough. There is another very important factor which might combine them to one, is that they are soymech al shulchan avim. And the havamina of soymech al shulchan avim means that they actually eat all together. That's the premise of the beginning. So let's read inside the Mishnah. Ha'achim shohayu oichlin al shulchan avim. And we're taking this now literally. Oichlin means that, guys, there's a chatzin. Now, there can be a chatzin with a father and, let's say, 4 sons. That's one scenario. Not yet. Here, it's a father, 4 sons, and many other people. That is another factor. The fact that they're not the only ones living here, right? So it's not a bungalow colony like just from a family. You have a father went, he bought himself a bungalow, he bought 4 other bungalows for his kids, and there are many other people that live there. But it sounds like from the Mishnah, but that mishpacha eating, they eat together. And by the way, the Alter Rebbe says it's not that they have to eat together. Every day we're speaking about Shabbos, when the Su'udah is called Chashav. Very common this. By the way, a bungalow colony is a great example where you have to make an Eruvi Chatzeres. That's a classical case. First, you have to make sure that it's physically enclosed, whether with Suras HaPesach, whether with a fence, with real mechitzas, and then you got to make an Eruv Chatzeres. Now the question is, how many people have to participate? And another thing, today we have this whole concept of taking a box of matzah and being maknit for everyone. Let's go that everyone is giving their own matzahs. So who has to participate? And however, even though they eat physically, it sounds that way. On the shulchan of their father, they each sleep in their own home. What's mashma from our Mishnah? That the determining factor is not the place of eating, right? Not the makom pita. Sounds like it. It sounds like the determining factor is makom lina. Since they sleep in different homes, they're separate entities. We will see that this is really a machlokes Rav and Shmuel, and obviously our Mishnah, they knew the Mishnah. This Mishnah will not refute the shita that says that makom pita, because we'll leave this for the Gemara. Let's begin. Smashma from the Mishnah. It's about where you sleep. They sleep in separate houses. The father and son, doesn't matter. That in itself doesn't do the union. They're separate, and each one has to give. But lefikach, let's go further. Therefore, like any other case where one member, one balabas forgot he's mevatel the reshus, he has to be mevatel the reshus, which is the solution for whatever happens when one member doesn't participate in the Eruvi Chatzeres. We pass like Besilil, that bittul reshus can be done on Shabbos. However, says the Mishnah, differentiating. When do we say that each one is considered a separate one? Only if the Eruv is not being placed in the house of the father, nor in the house of the sons. Let's read inside the Rashi. be'echad migbate sha'ar b'nei achatzit. Not in this family. The hoyel v'huska kula eruv. In other words, everyone is, again, the rule that we keep on quoting from Daf Memtes, that if the eruv is brought into the house of the father doesn't have to give bread. But that's not the case. Since the first case of the Mishnah is where the eruv is being placed in another home, not in the father, not in the sons, that means that they have to give bread. The question is, can the father give, and that counts for all, or does every son have to give as well? Hoyel migu deshad diyoidin asri inonami asri, and therefore v'tzrichin kol amlitem pas hoyel v'chalukim diyoirehem belina. Okay, and furthermore, as Rashi quotes already, I'm going to skip the next few words because I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. But back in the Mishnah, but if the eruv is coming to them, number one, which means, let's say it's being brought in the house of the father, which means the father doesn't have to give bread. Or in a case, Neville in upstate, Mishpachas Rubashkin, that's it, at least when I was there. Avram of Blessed Mary and his sons, everyone out of the house. No one else owned a home there. Again, they sleep separate. Here, by the fact that there is a relationship father and son, and that they are oichlin al shulchan avian, even though each one sleeps in their own house, they are considered now one entity. That's a huge Mishnah. So it's not as a pashut, even according to the Havamina, that they're taki eating together. It's not that the Mishnah says they're not at all connected. It's not true. They're only not connected when aleph, there are other people that live in this larger chutzner. Beis, that the actual location where the eruv is being placed is in one of those other people. The moment the eruv is being placed by them, or if b'chlal, there's no one else living here other than the father and the sons, in a case where they are oichlin al shulchan aviyim, and eruv is not needed. Now we're going to break this whole thing down beautifully. Let's begin with the reish of the Mishnah. And like we mentioned, that really, this is a machlokes between Rav and Shmuel. That is, when you have people that they eat together, Shiva Bachim, great example, they eat in the dining room, but they sleep separately. I'm not going into the detail that we spoke out earlier in Derei Shir, that we paskin that if the owner can move people from one room to the other, then that in itself means that no one is a real balabaster. When you go with that line, then for sure Yeshiva Bachim don't need to have an eruv chatzeres, because even their room, how easy is it? How it all happened to all of us? You're going from here to there. Ois, it's not your room. It's everyone's room. But even if we're not going to go with that, they're eating together. They're sleeping separately. Now, does that make them one unit? Machlokes Rav and Shmuel. So L'chu'ura asks the Gemara, or a statement on the Gemara, Shmami no makim lina goyim. Because even though they're eating together, they're considered separate. And really, this is a kasha. Because if it's a clear Mishnah, how can Rav argue? We'll see Rav says that makim pita is the determining factor. So no, Amar Rav Yudam Rav, you didn't understand the Mishnah. Our Mishnah, if they would be eating together in the grandmother's kitchen, then they would never need to send separate eruvim. In no case, they're considered one unit. Everyone is eating in their own home. The pshat of them eating together is mekabele pras. The father is giving them the money for them to buy the money of their food, or actually the mother is making the food. But they're not eating together, because if they were to eat together, and again, the Alter Rebbe says, when they get to this din, even only on Shabbos, but that's all that counts, then they would be considered one unit in all of the cases of the Mishnah. But we have time, let's hop another few lines. Now, this is a very important detail. Many times you have homes that have certain adjacent buildings connected to it with people living there, but it's not a livable place. So halacha determines that if that place is not meant for dira, even if someone is living there, he does not need to participate with an eruv chatzeres. And here are the examples. If a wealthy guy, so he has a home, there is what we call a gatehouse. A gatehouse is meant for someone to stand guard. It was not meant for someone to sleep. This is Mamash for Brazil. But never, that's his home. So he lives there. Now, is his not participating in an eruv a problem? Or there's an achsadra, or there's a mirpeses. A nachsadra is some sort of outdoor. Many homes have it. My home has it. Because when you leave your home, so you have pillars, and then you have as a roof that is leaning on the pillars, right? A portico. So when you enter your home, you don't get hit by the rain. What happens when someone is living there? Or you have some sort of porch. In other words, obviously, if some member of the house puts his bed there, it's the same household. Someone else lives there. They live there. Nevertheless, we don't need him to participate, and his lack of participation doesn't ruin the aid of Chatzeres. Someone else lives there. He's living in a non-livable environment. It wasn't meant for you to live. But if you have a Beis HaTeven is made to store straw, but there's walls, it's already more livable. Or Beis HaBakar, an animal barn, not an outdoor pen, not a deer. It's already a barn. There's walls, there's a roof, or there's a Beis HaEtzim, there's a woodshed, or Beis HaOitzaros, right? And in London, everyone has the shed. Now, if someone lives there, Harei Zo Oiser Olav. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He's more lenient. Rabbi Yehuda Oimer Einoi Oiser Elam Mokoim Dira B'Lvad. Okay. 1 second. There are some who explain B'Shitas Rabbi Yehuda that if someone taka lives in the Beis HaBakar, then they'll aser. But the fact that someone owns a Beis HaBakar, but he doesn't live there, that's how they learn. Then he doesn't aser. Now says the Gemara, Omer Rabbi Yehuda. Maisa, part of the Tosefta, part of the Braisa. Omer Rabbi Yehuda, Maisa ben Nafcha. Shoyle Chamesh Chatzeres Bu'usha. Chatzeres really means houses. And what? And only one was being lived in. The second to last line, Oba Maisel Necham Amru, Eino Oiser Ella Beis Dira Bolvad. The Gemara says 1 second. Beis Dira, not Beis Dira. Ella Mokoim Dira. What answers? There has to be a place that's fit for residence. And when you have a place that's fit for residence, then if the owner there did not participate, then he answers. Now, let's get the last line. My Mokoim Dira, Rav Omar, Daf Ayin Gimel, Mokoim Pita, Shmuel Omar, Mokoim Lina. Gavaldik. So if no one sleeps there, but they only eat there, is their lack of participation a problem? According to Rav, yeah. Since people eat here, that's called your place of dwelling, and you're living there. Now, again, not if you live in a gatehouse, but as long as it is more than a gatehouse, and you're living there, meaning, Rav, you're eating there, you are your own balabayas here. According to Shmuel, living here is not about eating here. Living here is about sleeping here. And let me just extend it. We have another minute to candles of Hanukkah, to later Shabbos. This is such a common question. What happens if I'm invited to eat by you? Where does my wife light the candles? By me, Mokoim Lina, or Mokoim Pita? That's the big question. Same thing with candles of Hanukkah. This is a larger sugya than the sugya only of ERUVIN Chatzeres. But remember, we're going to take up from here. Rav, Mokoim Pita, Shmuel, Mokoim Lina, God willing to be continued.
Chazak Baruch.
Very good.
Shkoyach.